through the crowded main market. His journey was never a straight line, but a series of steep hills. The early struggle. Emeka was the first of 5 children. His father's retirement from the civil service had been met with a pension in view that never arrived, and his mother's small vegetable stall barely kept the soup pot simmering. Completing secondary school was a miracle of borrowed textbooks and patched uniforms. Emeka spent his afternoons after school offloading cement trucks, his lungs heavy with grey dust, just to pay his WAEC fees. When he finally held his certificate, it was wrinkled and stained with sweat, a trophy of endurance. For 3 years after graduation, Emeka became a jack of all trades. Morning. He was a bus conductor on the bumpy roads to Awka. Afternoon. He carried blocks at construction sites. Evening. He sold roasted corn by the roadside. Despite his hard work, the poverty at home stayed stubborn. His younger sister was sent home from school for fees, and his father's health was failing. Desperation began to grow where hope used to be. The desert and the sea. It was Chidi, an old schoolmate, who brought the news. Emeka, there is a way to Italy. It is hard, but once you cross, your family's story changes forever. The journey through Libya was a descent into a living nightmare. Emeka saw the Sahara Desert swallow men whole. He spent months in overcrowded connection houses, eating barely enough to survive. He crossed the Mediterranean in a rubber dinghy that breathed like a dying animal, the salt water stinging his skin as he prayed to a god he feared had forgotten him. The hard years in Italy. When Emeka finally touched Italian soil, there was no red carpet. The first 4 years were a blur of cold and hunger. He lived in the shadows of Castel Volturno, working as an undocumented laborer. He picked tomatoes in the blistering sun for pittance, his back aching just as Nigeria. He slept in abandoned buildings with 10 other men, wrapping himself in cardboard to ward off the winter chill. He sent every euro he could spare back to Onitsha, even if it meant he went to bed with an empty stomach. He was a ghost in a beautiful country, always looking over his shoulder, waiting for a break that felt like it would never come. The turning point. Emeka's life changed not by luck, but by his refusal to remain invisible. While working as a cleaner for a small logistics firm, he used his breaks to learn Italian from discarded newspapers. He helped the warehouse manager organize inventory using a system he devised in his head during his days in the Onitsha market. The manager noticed, when a junior clerk position opened up, he took a chance on the hard-working Nigerian boy. Emeka worked with a ferocity the locals hadn't seen. Within 2 years, he understood the logistics of European-African trade better than anyone in the firm. He identified a gap in the shipping of specialized machinery parts to West Africa and, with his savings and a small business loan, he started his own brokerage. The Return of the King. 10 years after he left, the ghost returned as a giant. Emeka didn't just send money. He built a modern hospital in his village so no father would suffer like his did. He established a scholarship fund for children who, like him, had the brains but not the means. When he stood on the balcony of the new house he built for his parents, watching his siblings drive cars he had bought for them, he looked at his hands. The scars from the cement bags and the tomato fields were still there, a permanent map of the long, hard road from the dust of Onitsha to the heights of success.
You cannot just leave like this. We have a critical decision to make.
I understand, but my hands are tied. The situation demands my immediate... Emeka, I need to show you something on this phone. Mama, this is for you. Everything is settled.
This is for you, Mama. All yours now.
Yes, I understand the deadline is tight, but we have to reroute this shipment. The port in Marseille is experiencing delays. It's good to...
Emeka's mind was a battlefield where the images of his hungry siblings and his father's frail frame spurred him to work like a man possessed. He took on a grueling, double-shift existence. By day, he managed his logistics brokerage, navigating the complexities of European export laws. By night, he consulted for shipping firms, his eyes bloodshot
The
from
Q3
staring at
projections are looking
spreadsheets and
strong, but we need
manifests.
to monitor the
He
European
became a
currency
ghost again,
fluctuations.
but this time, he was a ghost with a growing bank account. The bittersweet realization. During his first few visits home as a successful man, the atmosphere was electric. The village elders called him, "Oh my Fufu," the one who does great things. His cousins, who had ignored him when he was a bus conductor, now fought for the chance to wash his car. His siblings treated his word as law, not out of respect, but out of a desperate fear of losing their monthly allowance. But beneath the praise, Emeka felt a chilling hollow. He noticed that when he spoke about his struggles or his exhaustion, their faces went blank. They didn't care about his soul, they cared about his pocket. He realized that if the money stopped flowing, the love would evaporate like morning dew under the Sahara sun. The great test, the deportee, returns. After 5 more years of accumulating immense wealth, Emeka decided to perform a social experiment that would either heal his heart or break it. He told no one of his plans. He arrived at the Lagos airport not in a private car, but on a night bus to the east. He wore a faded, oversized t-shirt, bathroom slippers, and carried a single, battered, Ghana must go bag. He hadn't shaved in days. He looked like a man who had lost everything. The cold reception. When he walked into his family compound in Onitsha, the shock was visible, but it wasn't the shock of joy. The siblings, his younger brother, whom Emeka had set up in a lucrative business, didn't even stand up to hug him. "Emeka, what happened? Why are you looking like this?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. When Emeka whispered that he had been deported and all his assets seized, his brother's face hardened. "But I have my own family to look after now," he muttered, turning back to his phone. The relatives, uncles who used to bring him palm wine now claimed they were too busy to see him. Word spread through the village that the Italian king had fallen. The same elders who once sang his praise now used him as a cautionary tale for their children. See what happens when you don't play your cards right. Asterisk, the home front, his parents were devastated, but even the grief felt heavy with the weight of lost security rather than concern for his well-being. The house he had built felt like a fortress where he was now a prisoner. The light in the dark, Mama Ngozi. By the second week, the food portions served to Emeka had dwindled. He was treated like a burden, a failure, who had brought shame to the family.
Emeka, I need
One
to show you
evening,
something on this.
as he sat under a mango tree, feeling the crushing weight of disappointment, a woman approached him. It was Mama Ngozi, his mother's oldest friend. She wasn't rich. She still sold akara by the roadside. She didn't ask for a report or a bank statement. She simply sat beside him and placed a warm bundle in his hands, freshly fried akara and yam. "My son," she said softly, "eat. The world is like a revolving door. Today it is closed, tomorrow it is open. Do not let their faces discourage you. You are still the Emeka
This
who
is
used
for
to
you,
push
Mama.
trucks to help
All
his mother.
yours now.
That is the man I see, not the money." For the next month, while his own family grumbled about the cost of feeding him, Mama
Mama,
Ngozi
this is
brought
for
him
you.
food
Everything
every
is
day.
settled.
She gave him a small amount
Okay,
of
it's
money
me,
she had
Emeka.
saved, whispering, "Take this to start a small trade. God will not
Emeka,
let
I
you
need your
shame."
help. Things are
Asterisk. The final revelation. The experiment was over. Emeka had seen the naked truth of his loved ones. On his final morning, a black SUV pulled up to the gate, a car he had secretly arranged. Emeka walked into the living room where his family sat, complaining about a leaking roof he hadn't fixed yet. He was no longer wearing the rags. He was dressed in a crisp, Italian catsuit, his aura radiating the power he had hidden. The silence in the room was deafening. "I am not a deportee," Emeka said, his voice calm and cold. "I am wealthier than I was when I last came. But I am poorer in spirit because I realized
Future
I was
Mrs.
living with
Emeka.
strangers." He didn't
us.
scream or curse.
Cannot
He
just leave
simply
like this. We have
announced
a
that he
critical
would
decision to
continue
make.
I
to
understand,
provide
but my
basic
hands are
needs for
tied.
his
The
parents.
situation demands my
The
immediate.
lavish lifestyle he funded for the rest was over. Before he left for the airport, he stopped at Mama Ngozi's Akara stand. In front of the entire market, he knelt and kissed her hand. He didn't just give her money. He handed her the keys to a newly
Future Mrs.
purchased
Emeka.
house and a deed to a large supermarket
us.
he had bought in her name. "You fed a man when you
Emeka.
thought he had nothing,"
Talk
he
to
told
us.
the weeping woman. Now, you will never have to fire Kara for a living again. As Emeka drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. His family was running after the car, shouting his name, but for the first time in years, Emeka felt truly free. He had found that loyalty is a currency more valuable than the euro.
Chisom, I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Please, just 500 naira for a plate of food. Or if
The month Emeka spent as a supposed deportee was a journey through a desert drier than the Sahara he had once crossed. The physical hunger was familiar, but the emotional starvation was a new kind of agony. He stayed in a small, damp room in the boys' quarters of the very mansion he had funded, watching as the people he had elevated trampled on his dignity. The cold road and the passing car. The most piercing betrayal happened on a Tuesday. Emeka had intentionally walked 5 kilometers to the local market to look for work, hoping to see if anyone would offer him a lift. His legs ached, and his slippers were worn thin by the asphalt. As he trudged along the dusty roadside, the familiar hum of a high-end SUV approached. It was his younger brother, Jude, the same Jude whose university tuition, wedding, and current business Emeka had paid for in full. As the car slowed down due to a pothole, their eyes met through the tinted glass. Emeka stopped, a flicker of hope rising in his chest, thinking his brother would at least offer him a seat in the air-conditioned cabin. Instead, Jude's expression shifted from recognition to a look of pure, cold disgust. He deliberately looked away, stepped on the accelerator, and sped off, leaving Emeka standing in a thick cloud of exhaust fumes and red dust. There was no phone call later, no check-in. To Jude, a poor brother was a ghost not worth haunting. The locked hand of a sister. Later that week, the hunger became a physical gnawing in Emeka's stomach. He walked to the outskirts of town to the Chisom Mega Plaza, the massive supermarket he had built and stocked for his younger sister, Chisom. He had even bought a bungalow where she lived with her husband and 3 children. He found her sitting behind the glass counter, dripping in gold jewelry he had sent from Italy. Chisom, he whispered, leaning against the counter. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Please, just 500 naira for a plate of food, or even a loaf of bread from the shelf. Chisom didn't even look up from her ledger. Brother Emeka, things are hard for everyone. This is a business, not a charity. If I keep giving out money to everyone who comes back from abroad with empty hands, the shop will fold. You should go to the farm and see if there is yam left to harvest. She signaled to her security guard, a man whose salary Emeka's capital still indirectly paid, to escort the gentleman out because he was blocking the view of real customers. The house of neglect, returning to the family compound, was no refuge. The majestic house Emeka had built years ago was already falling into disrepair. A heavy tropical storm had damaged the roofing sheets over the guest wing where he stayed. He watched his brothers, who were living in the well-maintained sections of the house, ignore the buckets he placed on the floor to catch the rainwater. They had the money to fix it, money Emeka had given them for investments, but they refused to spend a kobo on a room occupied by a failure. They laughed as he spent his nights shivering in a damp corner, the ceiling dripping rhythmically like a ticking clock of the disappearing loyalty. The parents' silent anguish. The most heartbreaking sight, however, was his parents. His father's legs were swollen from a lack of proper medication, and his mother's eyes were perpetually red from weeping. It wasn't that the children didn't have the means to help them, it was that they were too busy competing over who would inherit the properties Emeka had built. They saw their parents as burdens now that the Italian ATM was broken. Emeka sat in the shadows, watching his siblings feast on expensive jollof rice in the dining room while his mother scraped the bottom of a burnt pot to find a meager portion.
For his father, they looked at Emeka with eyes full of pain and shame, apologizing that they had nothing better to give him. They were the only ones who truly suffered with him, yet they were the only ones his siblings also neglected. Every drop of water that leaked from the roof, every kilometer he walked in the sun, and every door slammed in his face by his own blood served a purpose. He wasn't just acting poor. He was collecting the evidence he needed to perform a radical surgery on his life. He learned that while he was busy building houses for them, he had forgotten to check if they were building hearts for him.
The days Emeka spent in his deportee skin were bitter, But the market days brought a strange, quiet sweetness. Amidst the mockery of his siblings and the dusty miles he walked, he found himself drawn to a corner of the market where an old woman and her daughter sold hand-woven baskets and local spices. That was where he met Adarobi, the beauty beneath the dust. Adarobi was a girl whose beauty was a hushed secret, muffled by the harsh realities of village life. Her wrappers were faded to the color of the earth, and her hands were calloused from peeling cassava and weaving raffia. Because she lacked the maintenance of the city girls, no expensive weaves, no designer perfumes, the local men overlooked her. But Emeka, who had seen the world and learned to look at the heart, saw her clearly. He saw the grace in how she spoke to the elderly, the intelligence in her eyes when she calculated change, and the resilience in her posture. Like him, she had finished secondary school with flying colors but had been grounded by a lack of funds, her dreams of becoming a nurse gathering dust like the baskets she sold. The test of the penniless man. Emeka began to frequent her stall, not as the Italian millionaire, but as the deportee. He would sit on a low wooden stool, sharing stories of a hard life and lost chances. He tested her in ways that were subtle yet profound. The hunger test. One afternoon, he sat by her stall and pretended he hadn't eaten. Without a word, Adarobi took half of the roasted yam her mother had packed for their lunch and handed it to him. Eat, brother Emeka, she said with a genuine smile. A man cannot think on an empty stomach. She didn't look at him with pity, but with dignity. The loyalty test. Emeka purposely told her that he was thinking of leaving for the city to work as a night watchman, a low-paying, dangerous job. Instead of discouraging him or mocking his lack of ambition, she encouraged him. Whatever your hand finds to do it well. Small beginnings lead to great ends. I will pray for your safety every night. The character test. One day, a wealthy local politician's son came to the stall, flaunting wads of cash and promising Adarobi a life of ease if she became his side piece. Emeka watched from a distance. Adarobi politely but firmly declined. When the man mocked Emeka, calling him a worthless deportee, Adarobi defended him. Money doesn't make a man, she snapped. Character does, and this man has more of it in his little finger than you have in your bank account. The proposal in the rain. The climax of his test came on a day when the heavens opened up. Emeka found Adarobi packing her mother's unsold baskets in the pouring rain. He rushed to help her, both of them getting soaked to the bone. As they took shelter under a small thatch roof, Emeka looked at her. Her hair was matted with rain, and her clothes clung to her, but her spirit was radiant. Adarobi, he started, his voice trembling, not from cold, but from emotion. I am a man with nothing. My family has turned their backs on me. I sleep in a leaking room. I have no car, no gold, and no promise of a bright tomorrow. All I have is these two hands and a heart that has found its home in you. Will you marry a man like me? Adarobi looked at him, her eyes soft and wet with more than just rain. She didn't ask about his papers, or his plans. She took his rough hands in hers. Emeka, she whispered, I didn't fall in love with Italy. I fell in love with the man who sits with me at the market and listens to my dreams. If we have to start with nothing, then we will build something together. Yes, I will marry you. The final lesson. At that moment, Emeka felt a wealth that the euro could never provide. He realized that while his own blood had failed the test of prosperity, this poor village girl had passed the test of adversity. He held her close, knowing that in a few days, he would transform her life in ways she couldn't imagine. He would give her the nursing education she craved, the comfort she deserved, and a wedding that would be talked about for generations. But more importantly, he knew that when he finally took her back to Europe as his wife, he wasn't just taking a beautiful woman, he was taking a queen who had proven she could walk with him through the mud before he ever invited her to walk on gold.
Look at them coming back to show us their faces. Two of them together. What good would that bring?
We are here today to show you that we are not failures. We have found love and we will build it.
The day Emeka decided to introduce Adarobi to his family, the atmosphere in the compound was thick with a toxic mix of mockery and resentment. They didn't see a beautiful union, they saw two failures coming together to multiply their poverty. The arrival at the lion's den. Emeka arrived at the family house holding Adarobi's hand. He was still dressed in his worn-out trousers, and Adaobi wore her best church dress, a simple, faded ankara that had been washed so many times the patterns were blurring. The family was gathered in the parlor, eating a lavish meal funded by the very businesses Emeka had established for them. As they walked in, the clinking of cutlery stopped. The bitter reception. His younger sister, Chisom, was the first to speak. She didn't even stand up. She looked Adaobi up and down with a sneer that could wither a flower. "So, brother Emeka, this is your plan?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You went to Italy, came back with nothing, and now you want to bring another mouth for us to feed. You went to the market and picked a basket seller to bring into this house." His brother, Jude, laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "It makes sense, Chisom. Water finds its level. A deportee should naturally marry a girl who smells like sun-dried fish and raffia. Just know that there is no room for her here. We are already struggling to manage the space." The cruelty was relentless. His relatives whispered loudly about bad luck and village people following Emeka. Even his parents sat in the corner, silent and looking at the floor, too broken by their own suffering and the intimidation of their other successful children to voice their support. The breaking point. Adaobi stood tall, her grip on Emeka's hand tightening. She didn't cry. Her dignity remained intact, even as Chisom pointed a greasy finger at her. "Look at her skin," Chisom continued. "No cream, no glow. Emeka, if you had any shame left, you would have stayed in the shadows instead of bringing this embarrassment to our gate." The drama escalated when Jude stood up and walked toward them. "In fact, both of you should leave. We are discussing how to renovate the upstairs, and we don't need the smell of the market in this parlor." The lone voice, Mama Ngozi's intervention. Just as the humiliation reached its peak, a loud, commanding voice cut through the insults from the doorway. Enough. It was Mama Ngozi. She had walked in carrying a small bowl of ugba she had prepared for Emeka. She pushed past Jude, standing firmly between the couple and the rest of the family. "You people should be ashamed," she cried out, her voice shaking with righteous anger. "Jude, who bought the car you used to splash mud on Emeka last week? Chisom, whose money built the shop where you now act like a queen? This is brother, the one who carried cement on his back so you could go to school." She turned to Adaobi and pulled her into a warm embrace, a stark contrast to the coldness in the room. "My daughter," Mama Ngozi said loudly so everyone could hear, "do not listen to them. A house built on ingratitude will never stand, but a life built on love will never fall. If they say there is no room for you here, you will come to my house. It is small, but it is clean, and you are welcome as a daughter." Mama Ngozi turned back to the siblings, her eyes narrow. "You think you are seeing a poor man. You are seeing a man whose heart is gold. And you," she pointed at Chisom, "you are the one who is truly poor, because your soul is empty." The final silence. The siblings grumbled, calling Mama Ngozi a busybody, and an old woman who has lost her mind, but they couldn't look her in the eye. They went back to their food, ignoring the trio standing in the center of the room. Emeka looked at Mama Ngozi, a single tear finally escaping his eye. Not because of the pain, but because in the midst of a desert of betrayal, he had found two wells of pure water, the woman he loved and the woman who had remained a mother when his own family had become strangers. He leaned in and whispered to Mama Ngozi, "Mama, remember this day. For every insult they rained on us, a blessing is coming to you. And for every door they shut, God is opening a cathedral." He led Adaobi out of the house, followed by Mama Ngozi, leaving behind a family that had no idea they had just chased away the very source of their future. The stage was now set for the final revelation, and the masks were about to be ripped off forever. The time for pretense was over. Emeka had seen the hearts of everyone in his life laid bare. The deportee, who had walked the dusty roads of the village, was about to be replaced by the man who had conquered the logistics markets of Europe. The transformation. The lion reveals himself. The revelation began on a quiet Monday morning. Two sleek, black armored SUVs and a cargo truck filled with high-end furniture and food supplies pulled into the village, led by a police escort. The villagers gathered, whispering, "Who is this great man?" When the door opened, Emeka stepped out. He was no longer in the faded t-shirt and bathroom slippers. He wore a custom-made white senator suit with gold embroidery, his wrists adorned with genuine coral beads. Behind him, he had brought a team of decorators and caterers from the city. He went straight to Mama Ngozi's humble house. "Mama," he said, kneeling before her as the village watched in shock. "The dry season is over. Today, we begin the celebration of the woman who saw a king when I wore the rags of a beggar. The traditional wedding. Igba Nkwu. The wedding between Emeka and Adaobi was unlike anything the community had ever seen. Emeka spared no expense, but he was very intentional about the guest list. The bride's transformation. Adaobi was transformed. With professional makeup and a stunning George fabric wrapper, her natural beauty, once hidden by the sun and hard work, shone like a diamond. She looked every bit the Queen Emeka knew she was. The VIP table. At the high table sat Mama Ngozi in the place of honor, dressed in the finest lace Emeka had flown in from Italy. His parents were there too, their faces a mix of relief and lingering shame, but they were treated with the utmost respect. The siblings' humiliation. Jude and Chisom arrived dressed in their best clothes, expecting to be given front row seats and roles of importance. Instead, Emeka's security detail directed them to sit with the general guests at the back. When Jude tried to push his way to the front, Emeka's assistant handed him a small envelope. Inside was a list of every kobo Emeka had ever given him, with a note, "You valued the money more than the brother. Today, the money has stayed at home. Enjoy the rice." The ceremony was a vibrant display of Igbo culture, the rhythmic beating of the ojin, the graceful dance of the maiden group Adaobi belonged to, and the traditional wine carrying where Adaobi searched through the crowd to find her husband. When she knelt and handed the cup of palm wine to Emeka, the roar of the crowd shook the trees. The departure, a new horizon. The day after the wedding, the final phase of Emeka's plan was executed. He didn't scream at his siblings, but his silence was louder. He placed the management of the family properties and the supermarket under a legal trust managed by a firm in Lagos, with Mama Ngozi appointed as the local overseer. His siblings were given a strict monthly allowance, enough to live, but not enough to be arrogant. "I built these things for a family that I thought loved me," Emeka told them before his departure. "Now, you will earn your keep, just as I did in the tomato fields of Italy." The flight to Italy. The journey to the airport was a triumphant procession. Adaobi sat beside him in the back of the SUV, her hand resting in his. She looked out the window at the market where they had first met, her eyes misty. "Are you afraid?" Emeka asked softly. "No," Adaobi replied, looking at the brand new international passport in her lap. "As long as I am with the man who shared his yam with me when he had nothing, I am home." When they arrived in Italy, the contrast to Emeka's first arrival was poetic. There were no rubber dinghies or cold nights in abandoned buildings. A
private car picked them up from Leonardo da Vinci International Airport and drove them to a beautiful villa overlooking the rolling hills of the Italian countryside. As Emeka led his wife through the front door of their home, he looked at her and smiled. The struggle was over. He had survived the desert, the sea, and the even more dangerous waters of betrayal. He had returned to his roots to find a diamond in the dirt, and now, they were ready to build a legacy that was founded on something far more durable than gold: true loyalty.
The transition from the red dust of the Eid market to the cobblestone streets of Italy was like stepping into a dream for Adaobi. However, under Emeka's guidance, she didn't just become a spectator of luxury, she became a woman of substance, refining her natural intelligence into a polished brilliance. The transformation, beyond the surface. The first few months in Italy were dedicated to Adaobi's healing and adaptation. The calluses on her hands from years of weaving baskets began to soften, and the weariness in her eyes was replaced by a vibrant spark. Emeka didn't just buy her clothes, he introduced her to a new way of living. He hired a private Italian tutor to help her master the language, and soon, her soft Igbo-accented Italian became a mark of her unique charm in their social circles. She traded her faded wrappers for elegant, minimalist European fashion that accentuated her statuesque African beauty. Yet, she never lost her roots. She often hosted dinner parties where she served gourmet versions of Nigerian dishes, bridging the gap between her two worlds. The pursuit of the dream, from market to medicine. Emeka remembered the fire in Adaobi's eyes when she spoke about the nursing degree she could never afford. Once she was settled and fluent in the language, he surprised her with an enrollment at a prestigious university in Milan. The academic journey, Adaobi's struggle in the village had given her a level of discipline her classmates couldn't match. She studied with a ferocity that amazed her professors. While other students complained about the workload, Adaobi remembered the days of frying akara in the heat and found the library to be a sanctuary. Her graduation, 3 years later, Adaobi walked across the stage to receive her degree in nursing and health management. When she looked into the crowd and saw Emeka standing there, tears of pride streaming down his face, she knew that her yes in the rain years ago was the best decision of her life. The arrival of the twins, Emeka Jr. and Adaobi Jr., the pinnacle of their joy came a year after her graduation. The villa, once quiet and orderly, was filled with the anticipation of new life. When the day finally came, the halls of the hospital echoed with the cries of not one, but two healthy babies. They named them Emeka Jr. and Adaobi Jr. The birth of the twins was a symbolic victory over the poverty that had once threatened to extinguish their lineages. To celebrate their arrival, Emeka did not throw a party for the sycophants back home. Instead, 1. The Legacy Fund. He established a trust fund in the twins' names that would specifically fund the education of orphan children in their home village. 2. Mama Ngozi's visit. He flew Mama Ngozi to Italy for 3 months. The sight fed them in their poverty, now cradling the heirs to the Emeka estate in a plush Italian nursery was a full-circle moment of divine justice. A life of purpose. In Italy, Adaobi became more than just a millionaire's wife. She began working part-time in a specialized clinic, using her skills to help migrants and the less fortunate, earning her the nickname, L'Angelo Nero, the Black Angel. Every evening, she and Emeka would sit on their terrace, watching the sun set over the Italian horizon while the twins played at their feet. They often spoke about the Eid market, the leaking roof, and the long walk on the dusty road. They kept those memories not as scars, but as a compass, ensuring they stayed grounded in love and guarded against the fake loyalty that had once nearly cost Emeka his soul. Adaobi's life became a living testimony that a person's background may be the soil they grow in, but it does not have to be the ceiling of the destiny. The dust of the village roads had never seen a transformation quite like the one that arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. It had been several years since Emeka and Adaobi left as a failed deportee. Their return was not just a visit, it was a festival of grace, a public vindication that silenced every mocking tongue in the community. The arrival of the royal. The procession started village outskirts. 4 white SUVs, their tires kicking up the red earth, moved in a slow, dignified line. When the lead vehicle stopped in front of the family compound, a heavy silence fell over the neighbors who had gathered to watch. First, Emeka stepped out. He carried the aura of a man, calm, powerful, and impeccably dressed in a navy traditional robe with silver embroidery. But it was the opening of the passenger door that drew a collective gasp from the crowd. The transformation of a queen. When Adaobi stepped out, the village women stood frozen. The girl who used to wear faded wrappers and have cracked heels from the market was gone. In her stood a woman of breathtaking elegance. Skin, once dulled by the harsh African sun, her skin now glowed with a polished, mahogany luster, the result of a life of peace and premium care. Her presence, she wore a custom-tailored silk lace outfit that moved like liquid gold. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and she walked with a grace that can only come from a woman who has found her worth. The intelligence, you could see it in her eyes, the sharp, refined gaze of a qualified world. She was no longer just a village beauty, she was an international woman of substance. The heirs, Emeka Jr. and Adaobi Jr. Then came the children. The twins, now young and vibrant, looked like little angels plucked from a magazine. Emeka Jr. was a carbon copy of his father, sporting a miniature version of his traditional outfit. His skin was smooth, his eyes bright with curiosity, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that showed he had never known a day of lack. Adaobi Jr. was the image of her refined beauty. Her hair was adorned with gold clips, and her laughter was like the tinkling of bells. The children spoke Italian and English fluently, their voice carrying a melodic, broad accent that fascinated the local children who peered through the gates. They were the living evidence that the cycle of poverty in Emeka's lineage had been permanently broken. The meeting with the family. Inside the compound, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jude and Chisholm, who had spent the last few years living on the modest allowances Emeka provided through the trust, stood in the parlor looking small and weathered. When Adaobi walked in, the same siblings who had once called her market girl couldn't even meet her eyes. She didn't mock them. She didn't need to. Her very presence was a rebuke to their previous cruelty. She greeted them with a polite, distant kindness that showed she had moved far beyond their petty. Emeka stood in the center of the room, his children holding his hands. He looked at his siblings and said simply, "I brought my family to see where I came from, so they will never forget that gold is refined in the fire." The celebration at Mama Ngozi's. The real celebration, however, didn't happen in the family mansion. It happened at the large, modern bungalow Emeka had built for Mama Ngozi. Emeka and Adaobi took the twins to see her. When Mama Ngozi saw them, she fell to her knees, weeping with joy. Emeka Jr. and Adaobi Jr. hugged her, their soft hands a contrast to her aged ones. "Mama," Adaobi said, her voice rich and steady, "the seeds you planted in the rain have grown into a forest. The legacy of the return." As the sun began to set, Emeka hosted a grand feast for the entire village, excluding no one, but honoring the lowly. He announced the completion of a new maternity ward in the village hospital, named the Adaobi Emeka Wellness Center, where Adaobi would personally oversee a yearly medical mission. He established a market grant for women like his mother and Mama Ngozi used to be, ensuring no girl would have to drop out of school because of a lack of funds. As the music of the Ojin filled the air, the villagers watched Emeka and Adaobi dance. They were no longer the deportee and the basket seller. They were the symbols of hope. They had returned not to boast, but to show that with God, a pure heart, and a woman who can stand by you in the rain, there is no height a man cannot reach. The story of Emeka was no longer a story of struggle, it was a legend of triumph, written in the beautiful faces